So, like I could redline a turn down game with my
Nice,
love
nice.
for you.
True,
So
it is
there
a
you
true
go.
bromance in its finest form.
It is. What happened today? So we had a guest planned, I guess, and I was very excited about it. And I think I'm not going to name the guest just for the sake of this, but anyways, we had a guest, and it was going to be a spectacular conversation. I was going to learn so much and teach so much and listen so much and share with you and bomb around some topics that are really meaningful to my heart and my brain. And I was like setting aside my whole world, letting the Red Sea part so we could have this conversation, and taking care of enough business so that we could cut out and carve out like an hour or an hour and a half for this conversation. And then then the guest isn't here, and that's probably like me. I don't know about you, but I have it being that it's my fault for sure.
It is definitely your fault, Fred.
To a point.
No, it's entirely your fault. Yeah.
To a point.
Yeah.
I get that. I appreciate the confirmation. And now we're left with, well, since I fucked up, what are we going to talk about?
I think what we need to do is pretend that one of us is also the guest as well. And then we could have the listeners see if they can identify who it was that was going to be our potential guest based on one of us pretending to be the guest and answering the questions how we think the guest would answer them.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's pretty risky. And I fear that. I fear that we would say something that he or she wouldn't like so much. So I don't know.
Yeah, I know you're probably right.
But
maybe,
you know what I could
that's,
do?
Outside of the safety zone.
I think we could do a nice throw off on that, though. I could be a guest of my own creation, and then you could interview me until you get which guest I am. But you know what? That's pretty elementary too. So how about if we just introduce our audience to each other?
Great.
How about we do that? So
let's do it.
So, what is this insanity shit that we're up to? What is this thing? Really? What do we think we're doing?
Well, the way I see it, the way I see it, Fred, is you and I have both been through a lot of personal insanity in our lives, and we are now navigating a world which is increasingly insane. And, if I was to sort of kind of draw a general picture of at least where I feel like I'm coming from and where I sense that you're really coming from knowing you as well as I do, is that you and I, maybe more than your average person have kind of always been aware that the world is totally insane. And we looked around us. I think this was one way that we can really relate to each other. That we looked around us and we saw a world that thought that it was sane, that had this notion that things were pretty normal and pretty sane. But I think going back as far as adolescence for both of us, we were looking at the world through this lens of going, wait, everyone's fucking crazy. What is going on here? This is fucking crazy that people think this way and that they behave this way. I mean, what the hell? And yet it took a few extra decades for the rest of the world to start to catch up to the fact that, whoa, maybe we are a little crazy. Maybe we are a little bit off. Maybe reality is not quite as stable as we had made it out to be. And so I think you and I are in this interesting position of kind of going, hey, told you so. And now we want to share.
It is like I told you so.
Yeah. Told you so. Hey, you made fun of me back when I was...
now we want to share what? Our comfort with insanity?
Yeah, exactly. It's like, come check out this world. We've been living in this world for a while now. The world of instability. Come join us in our little pod of instability, if you will. Mm-hmm. How does that resonate with you?
Yeah,
Fred?
There's something you're saying which is really interesting. Yeah, there's something you're saying that's really interesting about that there is a stability. It just isn't anything like the stability that was manufactured by those who think that they're sane.
Ooh,
So in other words,
say that.
there is a
Elaborate on that.
pattern of, yeah. There's a pattern, it seems, about how things go, how they've gone, how they're going to go. And it is much more broad and perhaps more multidimensional than the apparent really myopic, very constricted and restricted pattern of living that humans have acquired, or that our little circle of American humans perhaps are mm, have acquired to sort of imply that if you're on that track, then you're sane, and if you're outside of that track, you haven't yet caught up to sanity. So there's like a manufactured pathway that looks sane, or that has been described and agreed upon to be so-called sane, and it seems like my real question, Sam, is it has people have people really like drank the Kool-Aid, drank the Kool-Aid. Are they really thinking that they were once sane, or really what happened is that they were force-fed sanity and just worked as hard as they could to swallow the whole thing, hook, line, and sinker, the definition of sanity that has been, implied uh, as being, the standard. I think the word you used was stability. That life isn't that at all, and we really
Yeah.
are all getting a nice bolus now that is not what life is.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, if we want to look at it through the level of sort of agreement, what I would look maybe the way I might paint this picture is kind of an unconscious agreement that there's this kind of collective agreement around reality that we have as a culture that you kind of, people tend to conform to at some point or another. They might question it for a while, maybe when they're kids and they start smoking dope and maybe taking some drugs and they start going, wow, reality's different than I thought it was, or it's more flexible. Reality's more flexible, or maybe the conventions that I just kind of assumed were uh, reality actually aren't reality. Maybe it's just more of something that people just kind of somehow conform to. But then most people, they grow up, they kind of do their thing, they start their family, and then they repeat a lot of the same patterns. And I think a lot of it is to sort of protect the known, to try to protect the known, because there's this instinct
Mm.
in all of us, this biological evolutionary instinct to try to protect a known reality, to make things as comfortable and as safe as possible. And I think that in doing so, we inadvertently prevent ourselves from opening up to the fact that maybe this construct of reality is fragile and not even something worth adhering to in the first place. I think that a lot of people just depart from that if they have maybe a taste of some alternative form of reality. They tend to depart from that as they get a family and get a job and go through life and start to structure their lives around what they feel like is a known safe space to reside in.
Beautiful point. I wonder, I wrote down what you wrote, like protecting the known, and it really is protecting the known at all costs. Like once it comes down, and of course we're using the word known um, loosely. What I think I know is what I'm describing as know. I mean, we all fall into the spaces that we think we know something. So we protect that as if it's going to create security, and then when we are introduced to that breaking down, perhaps that reality just simply, totally, absolutely just disintegrates and breaks down. That's one way that the reality, and that might not be what, don't let the facts get in your way, basically. This is like people are still, even if all of reality breaks down, um, people are still absolutely willing to continue to support the reality that they know for themselves. I
Yeah.
think one thing that we did is we departed from that, um, earlier on than most and have already considered it. Once you get that there's even one separate reality or one possibility of a different explanation for how life goes, then for me, the floodgates open, because I could see that if there was one different one, there could be many different ones.
Yeah.
And the search was on to find one that was more preferable, or perhaps one that worked to satisfy my curiosity of what the hell are we doing here anyway. Really, Sam, what the hell are we doing here anyways?
What the hell are we doing here anyways is really the question, isn't it? I mean, I think if you're not asking that question, you're kind of overlooking something really important. And I would add to what you just said by, you know, looking at the fact that both of us had expanded well beyond the sort of traditional, well, let's just put it this way. You and I had both done a lot of psychedelics before our brains had fully formed. Let's just put it point blank. I'm not going to beat around the bush with this conversation. Something that our listeners should know about the Insanity Podcast is Fred and I are not going to beat around the fucking bush. All right. Let's not beat around the bush. You and I had both done a
there's
lot
no
of
time.
psychedelics before our brains were fully formed. And in that sense, it was like the floodgates
Yeah.
were open before they got locked off, before it got dammed, And,
Oh.
by the age of 25, that's when our
Mm.
brains have fully formed. And from that point on, it's pretty damn hard to bring new information into that identity world that we call our reality. And, you and I, long before the age of
Mm.
25, were blasting ourselves out to the far reaches of the universe. And that's one of the ways in which we connect as well as we do. I mean, we're from different generations, we have entirely different upbringings, and yet we connect on this level that is very rare and very special. And I think we can attribute a lot of that to the fact that we were both expanding beyond the known reality well before our brains were fully developed.
Well, I concur, and it is actually beautiful. A part of me is like embarrassed about it, and another part of me at this point is like, no, I'm not either embarrassed or proud. It's just really what occurred. There I was, and it wasn't just psychedelics. But it was without a doubt heavily influenced by psychedelic ingestion. But there was also other ways. I like to hitchhike. I like to, whenever my mom would say, "Don't cross 9 Mile" or something. Fred, you can go for a bike ride, but don't go past Kipling Avenue. It's like, okay, mom. And then that day I would be for sure, absolutely past Kipling Avenue. What is it that she's telling me I can't see?
Mm,
And that's really the question. What is it that you're telling me that I don't have access to? I'm willing to not have access to it, but only after I see what it is that I'm agreeing not to see.
yes,
And it is in that exploration that I think we meet. There's
yes.
like,
Not
this shit isn't working.
nonconformist to the core.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I think so, right? I mean, what's the point of just conforming to something that doesn't work?
absolutely. You know, and I would add to that, nonconformists with a healthy respect for and
Sure.
compassion for what we might call the ordinary as well. There's a lot of nonconformists who are just kind of like, well, fuck you. I'm not going to take your reality isn't my reality. I'm a sort of a rebel without a cause. And then they kind of go off and isolate themselves. Sort of to taking that turn on, tune in, drop out thing and taking it to an extreme as a nonconformist. Nothing, no judgment against that, but that's not the path that you and I took. You and I took what I feel is a more integrated path in our lives. You as a professional
Mm-hmm.
psychiatrist, me as an executive coach. So
Mm-hmm.
we play in both worlds.
Mm-hmm.
We're bridging the
Right.
world of the ordinary known, excuse me, ordinary known acceptable, or I should say accepted sort of default reality, and this nonconformist attitude and perspective. And so I think that
Yeah.
that's something that that really does, where that's another connection point for us, is that we are bridging those two worlds between what is the traditionally accepted reality and asking questions that maybe don't get asked very often because we're also on a soul level nonconformists.
Sam, one of the things that's coming up as you say this is the idea that that in this accepted reality, in the agreement model of what maybe reality has been up until now, anyways, for most people, like with you're outside of the box and you're abnormal. There are certain sets of concerns and fears and discomforts and confusions and what disempowering context that end up being created if you accept the parameters of the generally accepted prevailing agreement of what reality is. There's a certain set of concerns and fears that arise from that and then arise collectively. And because they arise collectively, it seems like there's then agreement that those fears and concerns are real too.
Right. It
So,
sort of
not only do I come up with a
legitimizes them.
certain fear,
Yeah.
it does. All I
Yeah.
really need is one person to agree with me, and I'm good to go that I have something that's actually worth considering.
Yeah. Yeah.
But if I
Exactly.
have yeah, if I have thousands or tens of thousands or millions of people who agree that this is just simply what's so, well, then I won't even question that. That just becomes something that's what's so. And I believe when you say that we ventured out before our brains were developed, that we were already asking to a deep rooted core. There was, for me, anyways, it was like something is so here. Something is so. It's just not what's being fed to me.
Yeah.
I mean, something is so,
Hmm.
but it's
Hmm.
not this.
Yeah.
And
So,
and I might as well go find out what the hell are they talking about.
so if I'm going to invite you now into examining some of those commonly held presuppositions that people commonly hold and are agreed upon enough that it creates a sort of a collective fear that sort of
Mm,
validates sort of truisms
all right.
that get passed on sort of as memes in our culture. Do you want to do that a little bit?
All
I'll
right.
start.
Yeah, I got one for
Please,
you.
please.
No, you got one too. If you got one, roll it
Well,
out. I got
sure,
one for
sure.
sure.
I was gonna start with something like, um, uh, if you are in debt and you have a job that you hate, but it's at least paying you a paycheck, that it's stupid to quit that job, and you should stick with that job until you get out of debt, and ideally until you become quote unquote comfortable. That seems to be something that is sort of an agreed upon. There's enough people out there who would agree upon that stance that it's pretty hard to get yourself out of that particular stance without really stepping outside of what the culturally accepted norm would be.
That is a brilliant one. This idea of keeping a job that I hate just long enough to get out of debt, but no, even then somehow comfortable, which is certainly seems like it's kind of impossible to become comfortable if every day I'm doing something I hate.
Right,
But
comfortable in your
that I would
pain.
get financially comfortable. Yeah, comfortable in the waste of time that I'm pouring into my life. There's like, well, yeah, that is one way to do it, but what does it take? What does it take to quit a job or to quit being someone I can't stand?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. What does that take?
Like if I really yeah, what does that take?
Oh, and it just it's occurring to me right now how much reinforcement that gets through people reinforcing that, boy, life really sucks. Well, no, I get it. I get it. Yeah, no, your job sucks. You just got to do it. You got to, of course, I'm adopting some kind of accent there. So I'm clearly being some prejudiced in some way. But yeah, your job sucks.
Yeah.
Just stick with it though, because, this is just life. This is just the way it is, and that gets really reinforced too, that life is supposed to suck, that work is supposed to suck, that debt is just a normal reality for people. All of these things, when they get, you can see people sitting around at the bar together and sort of agreeing upon this as being just the way it is. And so then that reinforces that as an inescapable reality.
Hmm. And well, why would I? There's something about debt that you said, so debt comes in many forms. I'm sure we're talking primarily about financial debt.
Mm.
And for me, I'll tell you, for the last 40 years, I've been in debt, most 39 years of them. And I recently looked at how that occurs. And most of what I've been doing in my work for the last 30 years has been soul sucking and soul sacrificing at a very deep level. And when my debt would hit me or I needed to come up with bills, I would go back to work. I'd be like, damn, bite the bullet, or just like, well, I get paid a lot of money as a psychiatrist, so I can be a lot in debt and then come out of debt. I play with an extra zero probably than what most of the citizenry of America plays with. But I still, 20 to 40% sometimes of my yearly earnings is about my debt. And I get to a point where I'm starting to take, like, I'm current with my bills, like it's not that I don't owe, but I'm making regular monthly payments. And now there's not the same pain to pay my bills. I don't,
Mm.
like, I got my bills. I'm paying them at some sort of minimum payment. But now the cost benefit analysis of working no longer works for me, so I quit my job. Like, I screw this. I don't have to do this shit anymore. So I stopped working at my job because this is a good time to look for another job. And then, if it takes me a little long or I end up just, staying up late or not paying attention to whatever I'm going to do with my life that is aligned with me, then the same cycle happens over and over again. Before too long, there comes my debt. There comes the people I owe money to. There comes the people, who are looking down at me for not only being in debt, but for being in debt and unemployed. And in some ways, the pressure breaks, like the levee breaks, and I got to go back to do a job. I choose to go back to do a job that is totally soul sucking. And that for me, that's my cycle that I've been living for the last 4 decades or 5 decades, really.
Now, you're bringing up something really interesting that I bet a lot of listeners can really relate to. And I want to dive in here. And this is a subject that we could really explore in depth. There's a whole rabbit hole here. Ooh, is this Daniel Pinchbeck calling? I guess I just let the rabbit out of the bag with our potential guest.
You
Here,
did.
let me grab it. Howdy. No worries. You want to follow that link and jump on with us?
We can reschedule, Sam. I
Oh,
got to get
it
off
looks
at
sounds like
we
Fred
can
has to
reschedule.
get off. So it sounds like he
I have
he has 30
35 minutes.
if
If
you
he
have
has
35
35
minutes, you want to
minutes,
hop on with us. Would that be preferred for you, Fred, or should we do it another time? What do you think? I think we're going to want to
you know
talk with
what?
him
It's
for
going
more
to
than
be,
35
I
minutes.
really want, I think so. He's too brilliant. It's
Yeah,
too, I have so much to
agreed.
say that,
Agreed.
yeah.
I feel like we'd only be scratching the surface with 35. So yeah, let's find another time. No worries at all. Let's just reschedule. Find another time. All right, I'll text you. Bye.
All
Okay.
right, Ryan, this last minute and a half. Go ahead and edit out. Just pull off the phone call and Sam and I are going to go right back to the can of worms or the rabbit hole that I'm going down. So just pull out the pinchback contact right out of this video, if you will. Okay, Sam, back to you.
Okay, so we're going to dive in here right away. This is awesome because what you just put a voice to is amazing. And I think that the implications of what you were speaking to go so deep. And I think a lot of our listeners are going to get this. So, when you were talking about debt, you were tying it together with self esteem. And the
Mm,
way in which being in debt in this culture almost automatically creates this feeling of a lower self esteem than you actually deserve. That there's a feeling of, well, now you owe someone more important than you. So now there's someone who is the debtor who has loaned their generous money to you, and they're more powerful and they
mhm,
have more authority than you, and they can put you in jail if you don't pay. So now they have power over you, and so now you should feel ashamed of yourself. I mean, if you think about, here's an example. You go to the bank, you want to apply for a credit card, if someone, if that banker looks at your credit score and it's 800, hey, you're doing great. Here's a great card we can give you that has awesome incentives. You'll get X number of miles, and do you want to apply for a low interest home mortgage as well? Da, 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 all that kind of stuff. If you go in and they look at your credit score and it's low, they're gonna, hush hush, turn the screen, as you might not want to look at this, but yeah, unfortunately, we are not going to be able to
mm,
accept your credit card application. It's like, shame on you, motherfucker. You're in debt. You must be a
mm,
lowly part of the world. You must be
mm,
sucking from the teat of this
mm,
capitalist system and not paying back what you should be paying back. And so there's this unconscious, and this goes back to what we were talking
mm,
about earlier in terms of the agreement that our culture makes about reality, these agreements that we just kind of unconsciously accept, that there's something about someone who is in debt where they are somehow not as worthy or not as brilliant as someone who has plenty of money and has a high credit score. And I
mm,
think this goes back to
mm,
religious and philosophical traditions that are ages old, that are deeply embedded into our cultural unconscious, that would have the debtor feel sort of enslaved, or have the debtee, is that what a word, debtee, the person who is in debt, have them feel enslaved to the
indebted, indebted,
who is
indebted.
indebted,
Yeah.
yeah, to feel enslaved in their indebtedness to the person who is providing the help. But now it's not even a person, it's institutions. These institutions that have infinite amounts of money to loan, that are now the power, seen as the power or the authority that decides, what kind of a person
Mm,
you are based on your level of personal wealth or lack thereof. And the way in which that insidiously affects our sense of self-esteem is just tragic, because I can feel it without even you talking about it. I can
mm,
feel, and I think this is also because I know the feeling myself, the feeling of, oh, fuck, man, I just don't feel worthy. I don't feel, there's feels like there's a lack inside of me when there's, when there has been debt. And that then influences one's sense of identity in this horrible way that is completely arbitrary. Who says that
mm,
anyone in debt should feel any lesser than the richest person in the world?
mhm.
That's a
Yeah.
culturally imposed,
This.
insidious energy.
Yeah. So this is an excellent example of one of the fears or one of the concerns that rises out of this agreement reality that we're talking about. It's like no one really says out loud if you're maybe some do, but it's not a known conversation that if you're in debt, you're worse of a person, or you're less reliable, or you're less of a, or you're more of a creep, or you're, not risk worthy. And, if you get your shit together, maybe you'll come out of debt. Um, so that concern and that fear arises, and then we think we need money, and we sort of kind of do need money. And we're left with either choosing, there's a lot of jobs out there that you could get paid to do stuff that you hate doing. In fact, that's a lot of the society. You could get paid a lot of money to do stuff. You can get paid enough money to do stuff that you hate doing. That's why they pay you to do it. I mean, if you were going to do it anyways, then they don't have to pay you. So they give you money because, you will then be incentivized to do something you don't like doing. Well, you know, the money question, or the debt question, then sort of takes on a life of its own over the years. It's like, well, how can I find, like an ultimate question is, how can I live this life in a way that is satisfying to me and have all my resources?
Yeah.
It's like somehow those two things don't work together.
Yeah,
Crazy.
yeah. It's funny because I think that having this conversation now, if this was the type of conversation that was normally had, we might be able to look at this and go, wait, that's bullshit. I'm not going to agree to
Hmm.
feel lesser than. I'm not going to agree unconsciously to have my self esteem lowered by my lack of financial resources. Because it's the insidious nature. You mentioned a good word, that it's sort of unspoken. It's not something that people talk about and wouldn't necessarily consciously acknowledge. And that seems to me that that's part of the problem, is people don't consciously acknowledge the lie. Instead, it's through little subtle, insidious things like the banker whispering to you rather than getting excited about your credit score. Why is that banker not completely neutral whether you have a high credit score or whether you have a low credit score? Why don't they treat you like the same person no matter what your credit score? Maybe some do. I'm not saying that all bankers are the
Hmm.
same, but I'm saying that this is a common thing that we see, is that there's a certain um, mm, what's the words? Sort of a cognitive bias, a certain judgment that tends to exist, that has people, at least in this culture, if they have more money, they tend to be more celebrated, and if they have less money, they tend to be less celebrated and thought lesser of. We don't necessarily speak to it because I think that we're both embarrassed to have the conversation and also embarrassed about the subject of the conversation, and so I think that laying it all out, putting the
Hmm.
cards out on the table, I'm hoping that whoever's listening to this, watching this, whatever, is able to look at this and say, okay, am I agreeing on some level to believe the cultural nonsense that there's something either better about me if I have money or worse about me if I don't? And if so, what do I want to do about that?
Yeah. Well, you bring up, the power gradient of what is it that I have to go through? I could be put in jail for not paying my bills, or I could be, they could send the hitman after me for not, covering my debt. Or, I become afraid, less than, and contracted when I'm walking through life with, looking for what works, but at the cost of not making money by doing something I can't stand. So, yeah, that's one place. This money conversation, this money conversation certainly arose out of the society's agreement realities, and it it doesn't even serve the wealthy well. The wealthy are inappropriately given greater respect, so that when they say something about something that has nothing to do with money, they are heard as if they have something to say about it. So, celebrities tell you which tissue paper to buy, and you agree.
It's so true. It's so true. Wow, you're beautiful and rich. I'll believe anything that you endorse.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. It's really interesting. The next one I want to bring up, you bring up so I think we'll let's see if we can tie this one in.
Yeah.
It's only changing a couple words from the word debt. And you and I have talked about this, but I talked about it in my men's group earlier today, which is this inherent terror of the only thing in life that is definitely inevitable. There's only one thing. It's not two things. It's one thing. There's one thing in life that's inevitable. It's one thing that is absolutely, inarguably going to occur, or will occur in this life. And that, of course, is death rather than debt. And our
Death and
understanding of
taxes.
this idea that death is death. Well, they say death and tax. I heard that the taxes thing was added in the Lincoln administration,
Oh, interesting.
because people weren't paying their taxes. But they all knew there was only one thing too. But they
Yeah.
threw that in as a propaganda to get
Right.
people to pay their
Yeah, yeah,
taxes.
yeah, yeah. Little extra pressure.
Because there's a lot of people who don't pay their taxes and then they
Yeah,
die.
that's
I mean,
true.
so it's not, but it doesn't go the other way around. There's not people who pay their taxes and don't die.
Yeah,
It's like
unless
death is really a real thing.
unless there's some sort of interesting thing that we don't know about Walt Disney or something like that.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. It's true. So why am I so afraid of the only thing in life that is fully and totally guaranteed? Why is that the most terrible thing that we can imagine in this world, is someone or me
Mm.
dying? When in fact, it is the only inevitable outcome of this lifetime. It could happen in 1 second, it could happen in 30 years, and or 50 years, or who knows. And why is it that I'm trained to know that that is the worst, most frightening, terrible possible outcome known to life? What the hell is that, Sam?
Because you're not going to be able to have your tchotchkes anymore.
No tchotchkes.
No
Mm-mm.
tchotchkes.
I can't afford tchotchkes anyways.
When you're dead, no
I can't
tchotchkes.
afford them because I don't have a job. Yeah.
When you're dead, no, warm apple pie. I don't know. I mean, it's
Uh-huh.
very, very odd. Yeah, um, Krishnamurti, Jiddu Krishnamurti, the Indian philosopher. He has some incredible writings on the subject of death. If you Google Krishnamurti on death or something along those lines, you'll find some really interesting writings on the topic of death. And one of the things that he said, which really resonated with me, is that people don't really know what death is. That we have this idea of death,
Hmm.
but the idea of death is not the real death. And so, okay, to expand on that from his perspective, what he talks about the idea of death is he says that the problem is we are mistaking life for continuity. We look at our lives through this linear
Hmm.
perspective of continuity, the continuity of our family structure, the continuity of our bank accounts, the continuity of those objects that we bought when we were a kid that we're still holding on to, the continuity of our job or our career. And we're looking at the world through this linear lens of continuity and saying, this is life. Continuity is life, mistaking those things that are continuous with life itself. And his objection to that was he said, that's not actually life. That's a time based continuity perception that is just an aspect of how the mind works. The mind is basically calculating what seems to be in the material world consistent from day to day, and assuming that those things that are consistent equate to life itself. And what we're actually
Hmm.
fearing is the end of continuity when we say that we're fearing death.
Hmm.
So, how does that sit with you?
Hmm. Fascinating, especially when you start getting out to the edges and realize that that's a made up agreement reality, that continue that really what we're fearing or what we're concerned with. That I guess what you're implying is that death is the termination of continuity, like things somehow stop at
Hmm.
death,
Hmm.
like the flow stops
Hmm.
at death.
Hmm.
Now, what's really interesting about that is this notion of stopping, like the end of anything, is also made up.
Hmm. Hmm.
So, where did we get off thinking that at the very least, death stops the flow of continuity? It's like maybe, who knows, but I have an idea that death doesn't stop the flow of continuity. It might recreate it in a different realm or something, but I don't have it that I don't have to agree that it stops continuity. And it's entirely possible that what's waiting for us on the other side of death is even, and dare I say it, it's like, well, you don't want to be a heretic about it, but it might even be preferable to what we have here. It's very possible, of
Sure.
course, that it's even more continuous and more transparent and more beautiful than what
Sure.
we have
Sure.
here.
I mean, this particular, physical incarnation requires a ton of maintenance. And, there's a lot of repetition involved. To me, the
Mhm.
repetition can be a bit,
Mhm.
you know, challenging at times. There's a lot of pain involved.
Mm.
There's a
Mhm.
lot of challenge involved in
Mhm.
any physical life. Just maintaining this body and maintaining this mind in the material natural world is it's a lot of challenge. That's a lot of enduring that we have to do, and especially as we age, doesn't get any easier as we age too. So yeah, Alan Watts said that what we see as death is more like an interval. He described it as an interval, just like uh, winter is an interval between the seasons of fall and the season of spring. There's an interval, and
Mhm.
and I like that. I like that a lot. That there's an interval rather than a specific end. There's a movement that occurs.
Mhm.
Now, how we can know what that movement looks like, I think it's in that anxiety around the anticipation of what that looks like that creates that sense of fear. It's the anxiety of the not knowing what that interval actually may or may not look like that creates that anxiety. But what if we can
Mm.
transmute that anxiety? What if we can laugh about that anxiety rather than have it turn against us in the form of fear?
Mm. Mm. One thing it does appear that does happen is if we equate ourselves as simply this bag of bones we call our body and then call us, like, who are you? I am this, 6'3", under 200 pounds today, by the way. Yay. Six foot
Strikingly
three,
handsome.
197. What?
Strikingly
What?
handsome.
Oh,
Strikingly
thank
handsome.
you. And it's
Yeah.
I appreciate that.
Yeah.
So what if I consider myself to be this body and nothing less, and all this other stuff is just a fluffy accessories of this thing called me that's my body? I think we can hold it true that death certainly stops our body in its tracks. I mean, that's the definition of death. When your body is no longer, functioning or moving or, carrying on its daily activities, either voluntarily or involuntarily, other than to begin to, I suppose, to disintegrate. So the body stops at this point called death. But even that, Sam, and we start looking at, well, that's how death got described at that moment, as if that's the end of something, but it's really in the unknown that has everybody so totally freaking crazy about this concept of death.
Yeah.
Everyone is crazy about it.
Yeah, yeah, and I would extend that craziness to even looking at it through lenses that we might not traditionally look through. What I mean by that is, I think sometimes it can hide itself in insidious ways, where someone might say, "Hey, I'm not afraid of death. I'm living life to my fullest. I'm going to accomplish all these kinds of things." Well, isn't that coming from another fear of death? That sort of ambition,
Yeah.
oh, I'm gonna prove myself. Well, for what? What? For what? Why? Oh, because you're afraid of leaving this earth without having proved yourself. So, so,
Mm-hmm.
I think it hides. It hides in certain ways, like
Mm-hmm.
with this sort of a notion that one needs to leave behind a destiny. Why? Is life actually asking that of you? Or is there something inside of you where there's a deeper fear that if you don't leave behind a destiny, somehow you're going to be judged poorly? I'm not saying I have the answer to that, but I'm certainly dubious about that intention a lot of the times. It's like, okay, where's all this ambition coming from? And why is it so important to
Mm-hmm.
leave your mark? Is this
Mm-hmm.
just the fear of death in another disguise?
Mm-hmm. People really are. I love what you're saying. People are really. One of the men in my group this morning, the reason why this came up, or at least in the entryway, was that he had just got he's from England, and he or maybe Scotland, and he had just come back from a funeral at just then. So he was talking about the impact of death on the people at the funeral, and then people started talking about their parents, and their parents left before they were able to, resolve some particular conflicts. And then there's, the fear of our own death, that we're not living up to our own standards, or we're not taking good enough health. There is, good enough care of our health. It's like people are absolutely willing to kill. I think, Daniel might have brought this up today, but people are completely willing to kill themselves in order to avoid dying.
Yeah, totally. There's the irony. There's the irony. It's like this
Hmm.
level of suffering that people are willing to endure in order to avoid the inevitable, which cannot be avoided, is the irony is just absurd.
It's like the ultimate absurdity in all of existence. Exactly. It really is. I I know. So part of this for me is that I'm looking at this upcoming journey that I'm taking, this upcoming initiation that has me prepared to really look at this square down the barrel as best as this human can. Like, really look at dying in order to create space for the life that's waiting for me on the other side of that, of the death function. Like, really killing off that which isn't working, that I have been clinging to for this lifetime, and really taking a good hard look at that, and then replacing that with things that are, I hope anyways, I pray, replacing that with things that allow for greater groundedness, satisfaction, contribution, usefulness, perhaps purpose, these things that seem like they would be desirable qualities to upgrade and purify. And then, so that's just coming around the corner. So, in order for me to walk voluntarily through that, I need to be cool with even during this conversation, I need to be cool with the idea that life as I know it, I mean, just being able to describe this doesn't keep us exempt from being in the same freaking shithole as everybody, is the life as I know it is about to come to an end. the life as I know it is about to come to an end. And can I be good with that? And
Is
so
it, is
that's what I'm
that is
preparing
that
myself to
is
go
that
walk into.
true, or is that so? I'm not disbelieving you, but I want to challenge that. Is it true, or is there some part of that that might be a melodramatic sort of ego projection of some sort?
Hmm. Well, I'll let you know afterwards, but I have this attention. I think there's probably some melodrama there.
Do you
And
want to
really what I
elaborate
want to
on this?
do is I
So,
want to throw,
yeah, why don't you elaborate
yeah,
on this a little bit so our
I,
listeners don't think you're about to jump off a bridge or some shit like that?
no, 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 not jumping off a bridge. I'm going on an initiation from June 10th to June 13th. There's no overt suicidal activity at all. And in this initiation, I'm going to be partaking of particular substance from the Amazon that allows me to take on my own purpose of life. I mean, that's what it's touted to do. I'll be in very good hands, extremely safe environment, and the opportunity is take a big, cold, hard look at the things I've been holding as true, which then supposedly will come up for review and be able to be altered or transformed into being more consistent with the man I want to be, or the man I'm creating myself to be, or the future man that I can be, that isn't entirely held back and restrained by all these things that we are speaking to today that otherwise get in the way of my own growth and development. So there's that. And it's a 4-day immersion into nature where the promise, and I'm pretty sure it's reasonable, is that I will walk away from that quite a bit different in how I look at life than how I look at life upon arriving there. So that'll be next week, actually, next Friday.
So if during our next podcast you see an iridescent purple lizard instead of the Fred that you're accustomed to, you can know what happened. Sort of Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas style.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's more of a green frog, but
A
the purple
green
lizard or a green
green
frog.
frog, purple lizard. Yeah, I could see you coming back as some sort of frog lizard hybrid or something like
Yeah,
that. Yeah.
yeah, it's
I'm
gonna happen.
happy to
I
host
know.
a show with a frog lizard hybrid, a purple iridescent frog lizard hybrid. I think that would be pretty cool.
Well, we have a couple shows between now and then, but I think afterwards that really is going to be your burden of life. Now that you said it, so we'll see how that goes. Sam, I gotta fly. I got something going on here. Is there
No,
anything
this has
anything
been
else that
fun.
we've talked about it?
No, this has been
Yeah,
fun. This has been good. Yeah, I mean, the subjects we explored today, we could just keep on diving down further, Ben. But I hope they are thought provoking to some people. And it's always, as always, it's a pleasure to be jamming here with you, Fred.
yeah, yeah. It's a deep pleasure. It's a deep pleasure to be exploring the interface between saneness and insanity, and off we go. It's like off to go take care of some of these earthly chores, so that I can then wonder what the hell I'm doing about all everything. So, but in the
Well, it's
meantime, I might as well just immerse myself in earthly chores. So
none of it's going to matter in a week anyway. You're going to be dead, replaced by a
it isn't
lizard frog, an iridescent lizard frog.
lizard frog.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So all of this is just your futile last, week of trying to pretend to be a human being.
Exactly. Well, here we go. Ribbit, 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 and I'll talk to you next time, Sam. Let's we'll get Daniel on real shortly, and we have a few more guests this week. We have a couple even tonight, so we have we're ready to go. So let's rock this.
Love you, Fred. Talk to you soon.
Love you too.